Well, hello everybody. Let me know if you can hear me and see me. I think I've got it right now. I am broadcasting from a different place than the last time we did this, and so it may sound a little different. Let me know if it sounds good, if it's too loud, if it's not loud enough. I think this is about as clear as it will get. Crystal clear. Oh, good. That's great news. And hi, Debbie from Chicago. I started to type that right when the the banner came up. So. Um, Hello, Corinne. Nice to see you too. It's great to have all of you here. I am. I'm going to do a few things. Jewelry Jam. Oh, nice to have you with us. Oh, I'm glad that yes, you definitely had some really cool stuff, and I am really excited. I've actually been buying a lot of jewelry lately too, just because it's been coming my way for various reasons, and you folks will see that on the regular channel in videos upcoming. There's just been some opportunity to find jewelry that was unexpected. So, how is everybody doing? I'm seeing a lot of people. Susan, hello, nice to see you, and hi to Janet if she's with you there. I am. I'm noticing that a lot of folks talking about. I know Nancy Joe, you are online only now because your mall closed. Speaking of brick and mortar, so how is that going for you? And in general, how are you all doing? Just personally, as well as if you're resellers, how are sales going? I'm always curious. This is a time of transition, as we all know. So I actually have been pleasantly surprised. I've remained fairly busy throughout all of this. I think people are looking for nostalgia and reassurance, and old things have an element of that that I think new things don't. And so I'm seeing things holding up pretty well so far. And oh, yes, and Miss Wildlife, thank you again so much for helping with the live sale. And I know several of you ended up with things, and most of them hopefully have gotten to you. I know I have one or two people who said their packages still haven't come, but hopefully they'll get that to you a few days. Could could you light a fire under my daughter and get her to commit a date to come help me get organized? I have done that for people before, but unfortunately, the way I have to do it is by usually it happens when they're getting ready for an estate sale. And I say, well, sign a contract with me and tell them that you're turning the keys over as of this date, and anything they don't have out by then is going in the sale. And that lights a fire under them. Otherwise, there's horrible guilt things that you can use, like, um, remember all the times I came to your aid when you needed me. There's also the option, of course, of the gee, if you want this stuff, I need to do something with it by this time, and I need your help to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to just donate it slash dot dot dot. I know that's not always a nice way to go about it, but that is what it took my mom to get me to come get my stuff. So, anyhow, Jason, hello, nice to see you there. I have really bad back pain, so I can't do much by myself. Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's legitimate too. We do need more help. I've needed more help lately. Um, my situation is kind of ongoing. I'm having tests. You'll probably notice I'll stop and pause for a minute to catch a breath here and there because I am still dealing with that. Although the doctor has given me a couple of things that have made that better. And so I should be able to have fun with you tonight and not have any problems. I might just have to take a moment. Sarah, good to see you too. Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you made it. In January, we didn't make rent with our sales in our store. That is always disappointing and frustrating. And January is often that month. January or February, they're short. Well, February short. They're both cold. I know you're in Michigan. Excuse me. Last year in Kentucky, January was a really slow month. I think I made $100 more than my booth rent, which is really unusual for me. But it was because it snowed for a week and a half, and they just are not equipped to get people around in that kind of an environment. And sometimes you just have to go with it. It's just where the calendar fell. Um, I'm having that problem with my downsizing, throwing away stuff that should have been picked up by my daughters. Yeah, I my sister was the one who was real funny after my mom died and didn't want to get her stuff. And first, she didn't want anything, and I knew better, so I put stuff aside. Then, when the time came, she wanted it, but she wanted me to bring it. And I'm like, no, you're 3 states away. I'm mailing it. And finally, I said, or I can put it out to sell at my next antique show. And you know what? I got a return envelope from her the next day, and she got her stuff, and everybody was happy. um, eBay, you do well in January, but February is bad for you. Now, that's interesting. And I know you do a lot of ephemera. January is definitely a month where I think collectors who are online and maybe can't get out do more shopping because they are stuck at home and because they have Christmas money still. And so I find January on eBay is usually pretty good. Now, for me, February was too, but that's because January and the 2 months before I did a lot of ephemera and books, and that was all I did. And last month I did something completely different. So, but we'll do a video about that so you can see because it was surprising. Um, let's see here. Oh, 8 back surgeries. My goodness. My back hurts once in a while, but thankfully I haven't had to have anything like that done. My father did it. Never really went well. Sales have been slowish enough for me, but well enough to make the bills. And slow listing, yeah, you also have projects and new things going on, and that definitely makes it a thing. Selling the good stuff, I have noticed that. Good stuff is selling. People who do feel confident and have money are buying because, again, I've mentioned before, in times where people are worried about inflation, well, antiques start looking like a good deal. So that's good to know. Jan and Feb were great for me on eBay. Yeah, that's good to hear. Me too, honestly. Tootsie Roll yogurt. Okay. I have to admit that sounds like something I would do, but I never thought of that combination before. Oh my gosh. Yes, and oh, I know, and Carol Sue, you had that thing too. That's the thing. One nice thing about this business, honestly, is that thanks to the online world and thanks to some other avenues, you can still participate. I had a friend who, Betty Walter, and she's not with us anymore. She lived to be 90. The last 3 years of her life, she was pretty much bedridden, and she had her pickers come to her bedside. She bought from them, and then she sat there and listed the stuff on eBay, and she was selling until literally the day she died. So that's one thing about this business is that it is so portable, and there's so many different ways to do it now, and that's actually really fun. And lets people get to do something really cool, even if that's all they can do. So um, that's certainly been, honestly, it's been good for me because, I'm doing a lot of tests and doctor visits and stuff right now, but I can still do eBay and I can still go in and pack them all full of stuff for a sale. So it's great. It's really nice to have things to enjoy. Mary Jo, oh, that's right. You had the neck cuts, boy. Yeah, we all get a little bit older, but you know what? We just keep on trucking and having a good time, and that's part of what's great about this. So, um, and so, any other questions? Any general stuff that you would like to know about or have been curious about? Sometimes I forget to just sort of throw things open to questions. I do have something prepared that I want to share with you tonight because, and I think whether you're a collector or a reseller, I think it'll be fun because it is about all sorts of stuff that just turned antique that I think is very special and collectors do too. Oh, wow, hip surgery already. Yeah, I had a friend who had it very young with a knee because he messed it up skiing so badly. Um, so it is great that, again, you can do that. Yes, Corinne, you did see a lot of acro in my booth. I have some in Centralia. I have some extra that I am going to probably take to Florida or the Springfield Antique Show. I got 35 or 40 pieces, I think, when I was with Betty R in Mexico. It was so interesting because we stumbled across a vintage seller at a regular street fair. She was the only one selling vintage. We bought a bunch of stuff, and then Betty, um, this woman didn't speak any Spanish, and English, and my Spanish is uh, no bueno. So thankfully, Betty made an arrangement with her so that we could meet, and she had 3 tubs full of acro agate, and some of it had price tags from a mall I used to work at in Washington State. How did it end up in Tijuana? Who knows? But it's back in Washington State again. So it's so funny to me to watch the stuff that circles around. And the tag was probably 30 years old. I recognized it. Um, what is your opinion on testing ivory or soapstone in Asian figures? Well, ivory is really easy, and you don't have to use a pin or anything hot. Just hold it up to your cheek because it will feel colder than room temperature. It's a natural material. And that way your hands get calloused, so your fingers can't always tell temperature variation, but you will definitely feel it against your cheek. Then take out your magnifying glass and look at the piece. If you see a herringbone pattern in the in the surface of it, then that tells you it's elephant ivory, and that's how you'll test. Elephant ivory is not legal to sell in a lot of states now, and it's something you've got to be very careful about. So check your local jurisdiction, but that's how you can tell. As far as soapstone, to me, it's just there's hard stones and agates and things, and then the soapstone really does feel soapy. I mean, it's maybe just a matter of handling some pieces and that are soapstone, and then you'll get the feel. But it really does sort of leave almost a smooth feeling behind. Let's see. And I want to make sure I'm keeping up with you all here. I might need a bigger piece. Yes, yeah. Well, I'll try to put aside a piece or two. It's a small world. Yes, Nate. Oh, it's very nice to see you, Nate. I'm so glad you're here for this one because I think that it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about a thing that happened 100 years ago that launched a bunch of really great antiques that everybody loves now. So I'm so glad to see you. Um, this is a piece we'll keep with me. Soapstone has a lot of talc in it. Exactly. Yeah, talc is, I think, number 2 on most scale of hardness. It's not a very hard material. And so you will definitely get that soapy feel. And let me see if I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so ivory and soapstone. So that's how I would test it. I wouldn't do anything with a needle because if it's celluloid, you're going to burn it. Um, I don't think heat processes are generally the ideal way to test anything, honestly. Let's see here. Hey, Larry, good to have you. Yes. Puka shells do tend to be cold to the touch because, again, shell is a natural material. So you will find that. Um, okay. Any other just off the top of the head questions or thoughts or comments about things that you would like to know about? Let me know because otherwise I want to talk to you about something that it just sort of dawned on me. Excuse me, Linny Pie. Oh, it's so nice to see you. I'm so glad you're here. We, excuse me, I will cough from time to time. It's not a big deal. The yes, it's great to have you here. Haven't seen you in a while, and we will have fun tonight because we are going to talk about something that happened 100 years ago. Some of you might be able to guess, but I'm going to go to the next scene here. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating as members on Patreon and on the main channel. We're broadcasting to both here and very, very much appreciate the extra support. It really, really does make a difference. So let's get into overlays here because 100 years ago, actually 100, oh, wait a second, I want to put this up. I did not know petrified wood glows with a black light. And I have a piece of it, so I'll have to try that out. That's interesting. Okay. Well, let's see here. So 100 years ago, starting April 29th, I believe it was the beginning of something that I never thought of as being a World's Fair, but it actually was. And you all know I love World's Fairs. It was this. It was the International Exposition of the Decorative Arts and Modern Industries in Paris, the Art Deco exhibition. It wasn't until the 60s that people started calling the things that were made in this period Art Deco, and that became the official collector name. But wow, Art Deco is really making a comeback. It was very popular in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then the prices got really high on a lot of things, and a lot of new collectors were priced out. Now we're seeing some of those 80s collections coming back on the market. But I did not ever really think to look at what was going on at the Art Deco exposition, and it is really amazing. First of all, they had tried since the early 1900s, and you've got to think about Paris around 1900. Paris, the French Empire was fading somewhat in importance, and so they decided that their role in the world was going to be the center of style. It's where the best clocks were made, it's where the best fashion was made, it was where the best of a lot of the best things, luxury goods, they all came from Paris and from France. And so the people who did the ornamentation on furniture, on fashion, on all these other things that weren't art per se, they really wanted to be seen and taken seriously. And so they tried and tried and tried to get in with the art crowd. And finally, the art community said, yeah, we'll let you have a little space, a salon or two at our exhibitions. And that was great, but they were sort of treated like the orphan stepchild, like, oh, how nice, you're applying art to regular mundane things, but it's not really art. And they decided that they needed to represent themselves. Well, then the First World War came, and so that put a hold on it. And then the war was over, and they, oh my goodness, yes. Yes, I love Art Deco too, and the Cincinnati Union Terminal is fantastic. The design is incredible, the paintings are incredible, and Art Deco is just so cool. There is such design to it. And so, anyhow, so we get to the end of World War II, and the French are serious. We really need to put this on. We really want to do this. And so they got the Parisian government to allow them to tear down some buildings and take a section on both sides of the Seine River and actually have the exhibition there. All of the buildings were temporary and made mainly of, horsehair and plaster and that kind of thing that they used back then. But the edifices were really, really cool. And it is, and yes, it's both those things. It is where the Justice League meets. It looks just like it. And actually, Karen with the C is absolutely right. A lot of Jewish refugees came through that terminal into Cincinnati in the area. So the Art Deco exposition, they finally decide they're going to have their own. They tried to schedule it for 1922, but there was so much rebuilding going from the war, they couldn't get the materials together, and people said they needed more time. So it didn't happen until 1925. So technically, as of right now, everything Art Deco is starting to be truly antique. And there are some really amazing things, of course. But what was really interesting about the exhibition was, first of all, the photos are all in black and white, but all of the printing was in color. It was a very colorful exhibition, actually, a lot more than people realize, because we see a lot of black and white images from it. And it had a lot of different aspects. It covered illustration, it covered architecture, it covered jewelry, it covered fashion. We're going to look at a little of all of that tonight because there's such neat things that came from it. And 16 million people came between April and October to see it. And the idea was that they were going to reestablish Paris as the place to shop in Europe. So they had a section that was all French and a section that was foreign. And most of the countries that were invited were all of the countries who were on the side of the Allies in World War I, as well as Austria and Hungary, because that empire had been destroyed, and so they were considered fresh and new. Germany was sent the invitation a little too late to participate, which was deliberate, because Germany was on the wrong side of World War I from the French standpoint, and also because Germany was a low-cost knockoff producer of modernist goods, and the French didn't really want the competition. The other country that was not represented was the United States of America, and we'll get into those reasons as we go along here a little bit. So this is one of the pavilions. This is Primavera, and if you notice, the thing with Art Deco is it is applying art to everyday objects. This is not about minimalism. This is not modernism in the same sense as we think of modernism. This is where every surface is a blank slate, and every surface is decorated, from the roof line, all of the posters you saw. The decoration is very thorough. There's a geometry to it. It's not as fluid as Art Nouveau. It's a different thing. Here is the room inside of Primavera. There were countries that exhibited, but there were also individual designers who exhibited, and there were also individual companies, department stores, manufacturers, things like that. So you got a really, really broad idea of what people thought the future was going to look like at the time. I like this particular room because you see a lot of furniture that, in terms of shapes, is very similar to what we use now. And it is really cool, isn't it? I love the columns. I really love repeating geometry. I have to say Art Deco is one of my favorite personal design eras. Here is, whoops, wrong way. Here is the Louvre. Actually, they decided to tip their hat to the art people, so the Louvre actually got to have a store at the, this is the Louvre's pavilion. And it's interesting, Don. Art Deco is minimalist in the regard of American Art Deco, but that doesn't really come till the 1930s with streamlined design. That's what America brought to it. The French Art Deco was very, very much about heavy ornamentation, actually. Let's see here. This is the fountain made by René Lalique. Yes, the glass blower. It is pretty amazing. They had large glass figures at the bottom and satin glass as well. They also had a lot of other Lalique represented. Lalique was well represented at this exhibition. It really helped propel the Lalique company to the forefront of design in terms of glass. And look how pretty it is at night. This is the opening. This is the Porte d'Orsay. This is one of the ways, the main way you would come into the exhibition. And so on one side it has the big tower saying what's going on there, and then on the back is this incredible mural. Mural art really was starting to become a big thing in the Art Deco period, and eventually that morphs into WPA art and things like that in the United States. And yeah, just beautiful. And yes, I love fountains too, Jason. Now, as far as the theme behind the exhibition was that, excuse me, the inspiration for your exhibit had to be modern. Modern was pretty wide as far as the definition of what modern was. And so you had a lot of things that were actually more traditional, or very regional that came in from a lot of the pavilions, especially a lot of the foreign ones. The Belgian pavilion here, it is almost Italianate in design. It's sort of Art Deco. I don't know that I would think of that being Art Deco necessarily. See the big frieze at the top is very neoclassical, and the Belgians in particular decided, and the Swedes as well, decided that using a stripped down modern version of neoclassical style was going to be their interpretation of Art Deco. And it definitely falls under the definition. Here, on the other hand, is the boutique pavilion. This is the Galeries Lafayette, and there were lots of little boutique stores inside of here. And see how the French version is very different, much more, a little cleaner, maybe a little more minimalist in a sense, but definitely very splashy. And they want you to be really impressed. You're walking into that space, and here's this amazing metalwork over your head. Um, the British actually were surprisingly ahead of their time. Now, their pavilion, that was sort of a nod again to more traditionalism. This is kind of based on a neo-Gothic church, but the interior and some of the stuff that they brought was really very different. Here is, okay, love that center panel. Yes, I thought that was beautiful. I hope you're still here. He froze. Okay, am I back? Let me know. I'm going to type in, let me know if I'm still frozen, because on my end it seems like it's still going. So please let me know. I will wait for just a minute to make sure I froze on both. Am I back now? Let me know. I don't want to reboot because it'll kick everyone out and they'll have to do this all over. You're good now. Okay, Karen says she sees me. Everyone, okay, I'm back. Good. Okay, great. Okay, glad to be back. Sorry, don't know what happened there. Anyway, I was mentioning that the British pavilion is very much like a Gothic church on the outside. So, again, very traditional. They basically just stripped off ornamentation, actually. But then you got on the inside, and it was something very different and much more Art Deco. This is the inner hall with all of these trophies and the mirrors and the huge columns with the, again, geometric ornamentation at the top. This is a different style than was really, they had a big exhibition in Wembley the year before, and they were just starting to move towards these styles. So the Art Deco really got kicked off in England at the same time. Here are the textiles, and I think that this is really interesting because there's so much variation. You can see in the back there, you've got herringbones, which are kind of obvious because that's a pattern that is both traditional and also very much of a new look for the time. But there are dozens of different textiles, and they made a really big deal out of that. A lot of these were, let me find where I had a note or two on these. A lot of these were by a company called Warner and Sons, and they were using new technology to make these things. So in the case of England, England was a little bit more towards machine-made and mass-produced items. Bargain Barons, hey, great to see you here. We are talking about the 1925 Art Deco exhibition in Paris, France, and how it's not only just set the style world on its head and really dominated style for the next 2 decades, but also how it is 100 years in the past now. So Art Deco, as of this year, is becoming true antique. And so that's the textile building. Here's some of the furniture. These were made in Bath, the old Roman town. This is absolutely not what most English furniture looked like in 1925. Most English furniture in 1925 were send-ups of old Jacobean court furniture and carved bits and barley twist, and now here you have these things that look, The one on the right almost looks brutalist. It's really ahead of its time. The one on the left is mahogany veneer. One of the things about the Art Deco exhibition is that everything was about using really good quality materials and really expensive materials because, especially from the Paris standpoint, they were not looking for mass production. They were looking for very special things for wealthy people because they wanted to be known for that and be the world center for that. And yes, absolutely, there are elements of all of those things. Absolutely. Actually, we should go back to what she was talking about when she said that, if I can find it. I think she was talking about this. And yes, you see elements of, you do see elements of all of these things. There is a little bit of all those things. Egyptian feel, it's interesting you mentioned that. King Tut's tomb was discovered 3 years before. And when we get to the jewelry, you're going to see how that influenced things. Oh, yes, that's right. You've been to Bath. What a wonderful place. I've always wanted to go. This is to show some of the things happening in India and the colonies. This was a frieze inside the British Pavilion. So again, you're taking old images and you're adopting them for a new generation in a way that's very ornamental. And then geometrics. This is what the Americans who attended this exhibition got out of it. And that's why American, Curtis was saying earlier, oh, well, I thought of it as being more streamlined and minimalist. Well, that's because that's what the Americans took away from it. They saw things like this. This is sgraffito, and this is a panel of walls in the British Pavilion. And they saw things like this and took away the repeating geometry and the linear aspects and said, we can use that to make a new American style. Here's another thing. This was Carter Stabler Adams plate. Again, on the one hand, kind of folksy, definitely very English of that era, but also you have the beginning of the feel of deco in it, and very colorful. Here's the Polish pavilion. Now, Poland had not been its own country for, oh gosh, almost 200 years, well, about 150, 175 years. And at the end of World War I, it was restored as a country. And so this is the first exhibition that they are doing. And so they wanted, again, the architecture is based on churches in Poland, but they're looking for a really new way to express it. And I think the Polish pavilion was actually surprising. I thought it was rather good. Here's the interior, and again, you start getting into, you've got neoclassicism and a little bit of an Art Nouveau leftover feeling with the statue, but then look at the grading and the work on the door and the repeating geometry. So it gets really fun. This is by a designer called Tchaikovsky, and they also were big into tapestries because there's a big wool growing area up in the Carpathian Mountains in the south of Poland. And so what they did was they took some of their traditional designs that were geometric and then repeated those instead of doing some folksy thing like a lamb or an animal or a tree in the middle of it. They just kept repeating the geometry. So that's where you start to, hi Mary Jo, glad you're back. So this is where you start to see repeating geometry being a big expression in Art Deco. Then there's, here we go, okay, the illustration book. Illustration was a whole separate section. I wish I could have found more pictures from the illustrations, particularly for Fossil Forward to see, because I know you like the ephemera and those things. Here's the Lafayette Galleries again, but they were not the only private companies to do their own pavilions. Royal Copenhagen had an entire pavilion all their own. And you can see the vases and some of the pieces in the front window there. The front of the building is extremely modern, very Art Deco. It actually reminds me, I know several of you in here are from Cincinnati, Reminds me a lot of some buildings I've seen in Cincinnati built in the 1950s, but this is 25 years earlier. And so it has a different look to it. Interestingly enough, Sweden and Denmark, who we think of as being so important in modernism, they really went neoclassical at the Art Deco exhibition. That was really the thing that neoclassicism and Biedermeier furniture and those sorts of things were actually the influences that they brought forward, because they could be simplified to meet modern tastes. So it gave it a modern look, but it was something they were used to making. So really very different than what we think of with French deco or those sorts of things. But a lot of companies made really beautiful pieces. Here's a great example. This is Cartier. You have marble, you have copper, you have mahogany, you have gold leaf. This is a wonderful, fantastic clock, very geometric, very Art Deco in design, but also really expensive and made of really high-end materials, because this is the type of clientele that they are really trying to impress. The idea is that we're going to show you the very best, and then we can make things that have this look and feel that are more for the masses. But the items that were made specifically for the exhibition were made to be really, really spendy, really impressive. A lot of them are in museums now. Here's another one. This is Sèvres porcelain. Now this is a little more minimalist, but again, you see the repeating geometry, and all of the pieces are either Sèvres porcelain, and you see a couple of candlesticks, which are very much not their thing. They were known for big fancy urns with lots of painting and flowers and this sort of thing, and they completely switched it up for this. And then the other, oh, Larry asked if that was coral, and yes, there was coral in that clock. Let me go back to it so you can see it again, I think, if I can get there. Yeah, so that is coral surrounding, you are correct. And yeah, the color scheme is definitely deco. Okay, so in the Sèvres Pavilion, you have Sèvres, and then they did another dining room, or this is another view of the dining room. Look how minimalist the furniture is, but that's because the walls, the wallpaper, the design is so very rich and so heavy. And so that is your design in this particular room. All of the glassware on the table is done by Lalique. And yes, this definitely starts to look like some of the rooms in the Union Terminal for the same reason, because that's where they got the notion. This was an incredibly influential event. Here is a piece. I love this because we all know what Limoges looks like, right? Does it look like that? This is actually by Camille Faure. I hope I'm not pronouncing her name too terribly wrong. I'm terrible with French and Italian. But look how amazing this is. And this is Limoges porcelain with the metal collar and a nice base. And it's, again, the repeating design, the overlays. To me, this is just phenomenal. And it is so far from anything I would think of when I think of Limoges porcelain. So people were really going out in new directions with this, particularly the French pavilions and the French makers. This is all Christoffel from France. This is silver plate and very graceful, long, low designs, shell shapes, all sorts of things that we identify with deco later. You can see the sort of squat, sort of round, happy geometry of the tea set on the right. And they made really wonderful stuff, and they still make wonderful stuff. Funnily enough, these days, most of their designs are very traditional. This is what they call door furniture. This is actually stuff to use for the hardware for your door on your manse in Paris or New York or wherever you went with this. And these were all by René Frau. And so you have the, and notice again, there's just a little extra to everything. So the door knocker has all this design on the round part that ordinarily would have been plain in the past. So you're looking at something that looks like a column and a hoop, and yet there's just a little bit more to it. And oh, you've been to Limoges, how fun. Um, I really wanted to look into this, Karen, because I've been an Art Deco fan for a long time, and I'll tell you, I never looked at pictures of this exhibition before I got ready to do this. And I thought, why have I never looked into this? It's so amazing. So let's see here. Okay, now this is really futuristic. The Italian pavilion was very sort of dominated already by fascist styles because Mussolini consolidated power in the early 20s. So a lot of it was very traditional, but they said what saved the pavilion was Gio Ponti and his futuristic porcelain designs and other futuristic designs by the Italians. This looks so much like ceramic art that I saw being done in the 1990s. It's amazing to me that this is 65 years before that. And and yes, nice knockers are good. Um, so that is just, I thought this was just so well thought through, and the fact that you can see through it, and there's all this interest in another layer and another layer, and yet every single piece in this is very simple. There's nothing to it until you put it all together. And I just thought it was really, really cool, and I am with you. I really love this piece too. Okay. Um, then we get to the Czech Pavilion. Now the Czechs, once again, I am always impressed, whether it's pottery or jewelry or whatever it is, the Czechs really, they had their pulse on the market. And they really were great with the decorative arts. Let me bring up, there is their pavilion. It doesn't seem so impressive in this picture, which is the only one I could find of it, but it is actually supposed to be based on the prow of a ship. And so they really actually captured a lot of shipboard design in the pavilion as well. And this is interesting. Things that provide pleasure every day are worth more than a vacation that's over in a week. And I think that there is something to be said for that. I think a lot of collectors, that is a lot of the impetus is I want to be surrounded by things that make me feel good and are interesting to me. And I suspect that a lot of the people who went to this, that was the idea, is to, yeah, your vacation was to go and see all this stuff, but now take these ideas home with you and incorporate these things into your life. The pavilion was done by Josef Goslar, who was a pretty influential Czech architect. And they mixed everything from Renaissance form to everything else. And yeah, it really was amazing that they did this. It was in the works for 20 years to put this together. Here is a really cool piece, I think. Now here is where the Czechs, they took neoclassicism, but again, look how they do it a little bit differently. The elongated shapes, these are by Jaroslav Horjak, who is a well-known glass designer. So it's satin glass, but the shapes are elongated and they are neoclassical. You see the Trojan in the middle and the women in the gowns, but they all are a little more fluid and a little less literal than, say, like a Wedgwood classical piece. So it is a different, it's a different approach to this. He ended up winning a grand prize for this. They also had a bookstore, believe it or not. This was the bookstore in Paris, and the inside looks pretty much like a library, but the outside is so interesting with different sections and different places you go in depending on what kind of books you are interested in. And I just thought, again, you've got this repeating the diamond architecture in the friezes and then the columns, and yet it's not a column that goes up to hold up the building like the Parthenon. It's just an ornament on a buttress, not even connected to the building, and yet that is what the art is of this particular piece. The building itself is actually very plain. So it's an interesting way of incorporating two things. And yes, speaking of incorporate, I love incorporating trips with sourcing and collecting. It's so much fun because you get to do all of that good stuff. Now, again, some of the places were more traditional. And yes, thank you for noticing that. Yes, it looks like book bindings. That was the idea behind it. Um, let's see here. I have to find where I was. Bear with me one moment. Here we go. Okay. Now, the Japan Pavilion, Japan had shown at a lot of World's Fairs, and the Japanese love Paris. And there seems to be some sort of a connection between Parisians and Japanese that really started at this time and has remained to this day. This is a little more traditional, again, or at least a little more vernacular, although this was fairly modern by Japanese styles of the time. So it was a different approach, and a lot of the foreign pavilions, they did that. On the other hand, some of them, in terms of the things inside, really express things in a different way. This is Orifors. Orifors also won several grand prizes, I believe, at the Art Deco exposition and really established the Swedish glass industry as a luxury good for the first time. And I really like this because you have the figure up in the moon, and it's just a really neat design to me. Here's the Austrian pavilion. Now again, kind of plain but very linear. This is Joseph Hoffmann, who ended up being a pretty influential architect and was going more towards modernism. And there were some others at this exhibition too. There ended up being a real struggle, argument, difference of opinion in the way to go between modernists and the decorative arts. And we'll talk about that. It's kind of interesting. This is probably the most important of the buildings at the fair. It was called the Hotel du Collectionneur, and what it is basically a fellow named Ruhlmann, who was a big designer, organized this pavilion, and they built it with all these different rooms. And unlike most fairs and exhibitions before that, where you'd go in a room and then there's an object and an object and an object, these rooms were set up to be like you were walking into a room, and everything is set up the way it would be if it was your home or a hotel or a lobby. And this was definitely the big attraction of the World's Fair. He got a lot of really important people to exhibit with him there. And Ruhlmann himself was an ebonista, furniture maker. But it wasn't just him, because again, it's entire rooms full of things. We'll show you some of the people who worked with him. This piece of art was hanging in it. This is Jean Dupas, who was very influential. And this is the parakeets. This is considered one of the icons of early Art Deco, and I believe was survived and ended up in a museum somewhere, which is why we're able to see it in color here. Again, repeating images, elongated bodies. They're not afraid of nudity. It's the French. This one is the entry salon. There you see that mural that we just saw. It's on the right, and exactly, yeah, this was the idea, is we're going to show you how to use it. We're going to show you what it's like if you have all this richness in your home. And again, Don, this is very different than what we're seeing later in the United States, because everything is decorated. The idea behind this was, these are decorative arts and we're going to apply it to everything. So the rug has a pattern, and the wallpaper has a pattern, and the art is very full of design. The chandelier is grand but not traditional. The furniture is absolutely There's a lot of geometry to the furniture, but you see even on top of the coffee table, there's a lot of decoration. Um, was the rest of the room these vibrant colors of the mural? It was other colors. Actually, the mural, they wanted to make sure it was distinctive and stood out. So they didn't pick up a lot of those colors, although you do notice they picked up black lacquer a lot in the furniture, and that's what's tying it together. That's how they tied the art piece into the rest of the room. The other colors are more neutrals or russets and browns and copper tones and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there was not color photography at the time of this, and so I had a very difficult time finding color images because a lot of these were temporary installations and they went away. They weren't preserved somewhere. This is the salon that Ruhlman designed. He did all of the furniture, and you can see again very rich. There's lacquer and then mahogany and exotic woods. One thing that is pretty old-fashioned by today's standards is this was still in the time of colonies, and they actually did have some buildings that were dedicated to the colonies, but it was mostly to show the resources that they could take from the colonies and use to make all of this very expensive stuff. Lots of things made with ivory, lots of things made with mahogany and exotic woods, and those things were coming from French Africa, amongst other places. The rug is really cool. Yeah, love the geometry of the rug. The table, the center table there, center tables were still a thing. This is right about the time the coffee table is just starting to really come into houses in the 1920s. Before that, you would have a center table like this in the middle of the room because you could walk around it, you could sit around it, but it was a little taller. And also, if you think about women's fashion up until the 1920s, standing up was required because you were pretty bound up and corseted and wearing very stiff clothing that was not so easy to just sit back and kick back and relax the way we think of. That's why you also don't see a lot of sofas at this point. Um, the piano is great, absolutely. Yeah, there's just a lot to like about this, in my opinion. This is, that's the Jean Dupas again. Here is a room with a lot of upholstered furniture. Now, this starts to look a little more streamlined. This is what I think of when I think of Hollywood sets, like the Philadelphia Story or other places that are supposed to be rather glamorous. Interesting to me to see all of the curved furniture. Curved furniture is a thing this year in 2025 that is coming back into style in a big way. So it just goes to show you that stuff does come around again, and that's part of why I thought it would be interesting to look at this. Again, more streamlined than the other designs, but if you look in the back, you'll see there's a panel in the back with a big print of flora and fauna and another geometric textile in the back room. So there's things to draw the eye in past the more plain elements. And yeah, you absolutely, yeah, you can feel the furniture just by looking at it, which is pretty amazing to me. Let's see here. Um, I'll go through a few more of the sitting rooms. This one's pretty neat because, again, the furniture, you're starting to see geometry, you're seeing little ottomans. It's actually becoming a less formal society, so you're allowed to put your feet up on an ottoman. That wasn't done before. There's a coffee table. It's one of the first times we see that form. Coffee tables and sofas. These are things that we think of are just part of modern life now. In fact, if anything, the coffee table has gone out of style because now we just have tables that lift up to the sofa or lift out of the arms. But, you know, it was not like this before this time. Another sitting room. Now, this looks more like a lobby. They were trying to show you what it would look like if you use this sort of thing in a hotel lobby or maybe a small train station or that sort of thing. I would say there were probably no cats living in this space. I had a lovely white cat with long hair who was the sweetest cat I ever had, but Skylar was given to me. I swore I would never have a long-haired cat, and we came to a conclusion, which was my maroon Art Deco sofa was going to be a maroon and white cat hair Art Deco sofa for as long as he lived, and that was the deal. Let's see here. Again, this one a little more sparse because they're trying to show you what it would be in a more institutional place. But again, everything, the lamps are not just plain. There's a little extra design to them. The carpet is not just plain. The everything has just a little extra something, as opposed to modernism, which we'll see, and you'll be able to compare. This is the entry parlor. A lot of the great work was done by Edgar Brandt, who is another famous metal worker. I believe he also did the, I'm not sure if it was Brandt or Jean Dunan who did the chandeliers. But again, the chandelier has lots of arms like an old chandelier, and it even could be wired for gas because the shades point up, but it is absolutely not like your Victorian gas chandelier. And yes, I like the lights very much. They really get me. There is a building here in Seattle called the well, it was one of the railroad buildings. I forget what they call it now. Built in 1929, and they have an interior lobby that looks a lot like this. And the exterior of the building was done so that the brick gets lighter as it goes to the top because it was supposed to emulate a mountain. It's one of the best examples of Art Deco architecture here in Seattle, and definitely was inspired by the feel of this room here with all of the heavy marble and, again, just really beautiful materials that were brought from very, very far away. This was definitely not, and yeah, see, this is the thing. You wouldn't, the last room is Art Deco. I'm not sure if you mean this one or the one before. I think you mean the one before. Because it's more, this one. Yeah, because it's more streamlined and it isn't heavy, but you still, if you look in the back, you have the unusual grading, you have the squarishness. This actually, to be honest with you, if I looked at this, I would think this was art moderne from maybe the 1950 vintage. So yes, I see exactly what you're saying. Here's another Ruhlman piece, and this is all inlaid and lacquer work. And it's just pretty phenomenal that anyone would do that much. Yeah, the one before, okay. Chandelier, there's another view of that room. You can see even right up to this, right up to the ceiling is heavily decorated, which I think is really neat. Here's another room, or another look at that room. Here is a bedroom. Again, this is a little more Spartan. This is more like what people actually lived with in the 1930s. But again, things are rounded. The proportions, I like the asymmetry in the back. It's still geometric, but that curtain just sort of stops with that balance. It's not a formal, complete boxy surround. So they're thinking outside of the usual boxes. Here's the library, and you have all of the bronze panels at the top there with the people in them, very stylized. And yeah, the ceiling. This ceiling is neat too, actually. I think you were looking at the one before, but this ceiling's cool too because it's got lots of bubbles. They just were really having a lot of fun with this. It took them so long to mount this that I think they just thought, we are going to have a great time and we're going to show the really, really best of what we know how to do, including this piece. Now this is funky and weird, but it is really cool. Let me try to enlarge it for you. This is an iconic piece that still exists. It sold for, if I remember right, it sold to a collector 30 years ago for 1.8 million, I think. This is the Donkey and Hedgehog, and yes, the French absolutely love to paper and paint every surface. And Ruhlman was just really having fun with this piece when he made it. So why is the donkey getting close to that hedgehog? I don't know, but there is a story there. But the lacquerware was definitely something that was an Asian influence that really had crept into Art Deco in a big way. Here's a dining room, and again, just everything, all the art, all of the textiles, even the table covering, everything has a little extra something to it. Another rug I really like in this room. This is a nice little sitting room, and lots of round shapes as well, round mirrors and things. This one, again, you see the furniture. It's squarish, but there's a geometry to it all. And look at the treatment on the mantle. I think that's really fun. I'd like to see one of these house flipper shows do something like that instead of just painting every mantle white. This one is neat. You see the big cabinet on the back wall there with the big bouquet in the middle. And then the other furniture with the white trim on the lacquer. Lots of use of glass too. We really start to see a lot of that in this period. Big windows. This one we saw before. Let's see here. This I thought was interesting. That drop, I guess you'd call it a chandelier, the lighting fixture in the middle of the hall is really something. It not only hangs, but then there's more design up above it. And of course, these spaces are quite sumptuous because, again, we're implying that this is for the most wealthy class. Another bedroom. We're going to get to a point here shortly where I'll get to show you some other things too besides just rooms, but some of these are pretty incredible. This looks like, again, a Hollywood set to me. This looks like something out of a 1930s Hollywood movie because the movie stars quickly adopted these styles in the United States. And then the Fisherman. So this is Raoul Dufy, and this is 1925. By 1940, Don Blanding in the United States is making a nice living doing silhouettes with lots of design and writing poetry and making little books of them. So this is something that carried on, and then his designs ended up being used on dinnerware. So this stuff was really, really influential. And yes, Mary Jo, I would have that bedroom too. All right, let's see. Okay, so we mentioned the colonies. This is one of the pavilions for the colonies. And so they're showing some really interesting architecture influenced by some of the Asian design. And yeah, that really did look like a movie set. I agree, Lynn. Here is the French Africa Pavilion. And this is an interesting piece. This is by Domergue and Lagarde. And this painting is Travail and, oh shoot, what's the name? It's basically supposed to show the struggle between pacifism and work and travail. And of course, at this time, who's working? Well, all the people in the colonies are working very hard to make the materials available so that the wealthy in Europe can live like this. So there's a little bit of social commentary here. On the one hand, it's really beautiful and it's nice that they acknowledge the colonies and their importance to being able to make this lifestyle happen. Of course, there's a flip side to that. Here's the interior of the Tunisian hall, and again, Tunisia is known for tile work. So you see really beautiful tile work done in an Art Deco design all through the floors. The mural, again, muralism is really starting to take off at this point. And so just really beautiful again. I mentioned Edgar Brandt. He did a lot of the, yeah, I thought that was pretty powerful too. He did a lot of the gateways between pavilions, between rooms, between halls, and a lot of the metal work. Here is another grill of his. There's the close up. There it is in the larger room, so you can see how that looks. And I just love the metalwork. And then this is a fantastic screen. This one obviously has still been preserved. You've got the fountain in the middle with just all the spray going all those different directions. And then these modified floral designs on all of the other panels. And you've got bronze and brass and some sort of a silver. I believe that was a plated silver that they used. Just really incredible. And again, all over ornamentation. Now we're going to talk for a minute about why is American Deco different? So here was a statue that is called La France, and this was at the exhibition, and this was done by the French in honor of the Americans who came to their aid in World War I. And this was displayed prominently. Why was there not an American pavilion? Well, for years I was told that there was not an American pavilion because, those snotty French, they just said, oh, everything you do is derivative. And I've told this story a long time because I was told this, and it turns out this is not true. So for years I was told that the French had a big attitude and said, you don't do anything modern, so you're not invited to participate. Turns out that the French actually approached the Secretary of Commerce, a man named Herbert Hoover, who worked under the Coolidge administration. And they said, would you like to have a display here? And he did not understand the assignment. And he was asked he was told the thing is that you will have to have your designers do things that represent new modern trends in decorating. And Herbert Hoover told them, we don't do anything modern. Herbert Hoover told them that everything we did was derivative of Europe and that there would be no place for us there. And that's the reason that the United States was not represented at this exhibition. It caused a real stir. And what happened was all sorts of designers, Norman Bel Geddes, Russell Wright, a bunch of other ultimately famous American designers, hundreds of them, poured into the Art Deco exhibition in Paris to get inspiration and figure out what was it that we weren't doing that the rest of the world was. And they were so knocked out by it that they came back, and of course a lot of them knew each other, and they started discussing how do we develop a modernist American design. And that's why, Don Curtis, we ended up with Streamline Moderne, and Streamline Moderne is definitely a lot more elemental and not nearly as heavy and not as much all over decoration as what you see here. So that is the real reason that we were not involved. And yes, Herbert Hoover was a bit of a crumb bum. He ended up being quite a philanthropist after he saw the devastation of the Depression. So there is redemption for everybody. But yeah, he missed it bad on that one. So within a few years, you had rooms like this appearing this is Lord and Taylor in New York. And this was within a year of the Art Deco exhibition in Paris. This is what Lord and Taylor was showing. So it caught on very quickly in the United States. But ours ended up being a little bit more of a merge between this style of deco and modernism, and I'll show you why that is in a little bit here. These are really beautiful. These are Claudius Lemoser. These are all metal. This is very different than the inlaid Art Nouveau metal pieces that were being done in the teens. And it is just, again, the repeating geometry. The one in the foreground looks like something that could be Native American. Actually, a couple of these do, but they are all made of metal. I thought they were pretty impressive. This is called Tympanium. This is by Raymond Delmar. And this is something that was done, I believe, actually in plaster. And again, you have the you've got that really looks potentially uncomfortable with that animal coming at them. But you've got the couple here, and then look at all the background. It's not just about them. It's really about uh, it's what's happening behind them as much as anything. Okay, so now we're going to get into something that I think will be fun for a lot of you. They also had fashion pavilions. Here is the poster for the Franco-Belgian mode. Moda is fashion in French and German and I think Spanish. Um, for the toilette, for parure, which are groupings of outfits. Um, it is, I mean, and again, look at the Japanese style that has come into the Parisian art. So you're seeing that connection there. Here is the entry to the fashion hall. And look at those amazing mannequins. A lot of those were a brand new design that were, they were brutalist, and I'm trying to think of who the designer was. But they're somewhere between Deco and Brutalism. Um, I have to look. I have to cheat on this one. Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah, it was a husband and wife. That's right. Siegel and Pierre um, Imans. And Cubism was what really inspired them. Cubism is still a force in design at this point, and so you see these amazing mannequins with this very very sort of still and almost haughty aspect to them. Here was more practical fashion for everyday people in another part, including children. But what people really came for were things like this. This is the Caillot sisters. And look how beautiful that is. So graceful. You have the length, the shoes. Again, this is about dress me, dress my house. This is formal living for people who are doing very well in life. And you can just see it, but they're just beautiful. I hope some of these still exist somewhere. This is supposed to be the actress's dressing room, and I get a big kick out of this too because uh, she has the robes. Again, you see layers of ornament. You see a chain and another chain, and I really think these are beautiful displays. All of them. They're just gorgeous. This is why I wanted to share this with you. The furniture was all done by another furniture designer whose name escapes me. But again, you know, it's almost plain, but then we've got this black lacquer ornament along the front of it, and I do think they're beautiful too. Honestly, I just I think if I could go back in time to one World's Fair after having seen this, this would be the one. So here we are with the catalog, and here we are with the cloche. This is a particularly ornate one, but cloche's bell, and I'm sure it's pronounced in a more lovely way than I did. But there are these bell-shaped caps, and this one is particularly grand with lots of metalwork and jewels and beading. But even just sequined or just in felt close to the head, this became the style of the flappers in the middle 1920s. And yes, exactly. Sculptures wearing the newest fashions. Let's see here. Here we go. Now we'll get into some jewelry. This is a Boucheron Portier. This is gold and ivory and diamonds. And this is actually to be worn over the shoulder. It doesn't pin anywhere. It was just a heavy bar and heavy enough that you would balance it on your shoulder. Obviously, this is for very genteel people having very genteel parties. They're not doing the Charleston. And then this piece would hang down over your shoulder. I said it correctly. Okay, very good. This is a very nice jewelry box with some were done with jade, some were done with malachite. You see the beginning, and the 1920s were this was a big deal then. See in the middle there, those are marcasites, and they are being used to simulate diamonds because in some of these they would have done diamonds. Yes, that would fall off me in about half a second as well. Matahari, yes, Matahari absolutely has the look. Now there's where we're seeing Egyptian design still in 1925. That's a new enough notion, the discovery of King Tut's tomb. This is Van Cleef and Arpels. So yes, those are all diamonds, and yes, those are all onyx, and yes, those are all emeralds and rubies, and all of that is probably if this existed today, I'm sure it would be six figures easily. And this is, yeah, I could use that jewelry box in my life too. Reminds me of the TARDIS. I like that. Yes, I like that one too. And yes, I adore malachite. I actually like it better than jade because it's a richer color. I'm not so much about necessarily the value of the stones as how they look to me. I like colored stones, and colored stones were the thing in the 1920s. This is a piece that was done by Cartier, as was this one. This one is really quite beautiful. This is an illustration of it, but this was an actual set. And what a great set. Not just a wonderful necklace that goes all the way around the shoulder, but that headpiece. Just incredible. And yes, malachite in its natural form is really great too, actually. Not everything needs to be polished to be beautiful. Uh, Here's Jean Durand, or Dunand, another piece. This is called Coquille, and this is a pocket watch with all sorts of decoration on it in enameling. Same artist here. This is called the giraffe necklace, and you see lacquer work, you see gold. The orange material, I believe, is coral. And so you just have all of these wonderful colors and brightness, and they were not afraid of color. A lot like the collectors now, they really like color. This one, Man Ray did a lot of the designs. This is Nancy Cunard wearing, and these are mainly ivory, really big, wide ivory bands, because this is back in the era where gathering ivory was not considered an impermissible thing like it is now. Yeah, wasn't that amazing? And yes, bangles. Yes, yes, that's true. This is the beginning of wearing multiple bangles. That was not done before. A part of the idea behind this exhibition, in fact, was to show people doing things that were considered wrong, quote unquote, traditionally. It was wrong to wear more than one bracelet until the 1920s, and then it became very right. So that's a good example. They really wanted to turn convention on its head and show what the modern era could be. This is a chiffonier. This is by, oh shoot, what's his name? Andre. Can't remember his last name. Boy, he was an important person too. Let me see if I can find this, just because I think it'd be interesting for you to know. Yeah, I'm not getting it well. I'll have to pin that sometime after I do this. And yeah, this is a great piece. This is a chiffonier. The idea is that this is supposed to be for your jewelry. Andre Gorgot. And the idea behind this isn't just that it's for your jewelry, it's that it has a shape. And the shape is actually supposed to be an abstraction of the female figure, torso. So you have a little bit of a broadening and then a waist and then a broadening again. And that was very deliberate. This is all completely inlaid in, again, in ivory. So that was, this is a piece that still exists and is in a museum and is valued for insurance at something like $8 million or some giant amount. Now we get into modernism because there was a little bit of modernism at the Art Deco exhibition in the form of the Malichnikov did the Russian pavilion, which you see here. Russia had been on our side during World War I, and so in spite of the Bolshevik Revolution, they were invited to participate, and they built this building, which is absolutely modernist and not really very Art Deco at all. In some ways, this was way ahead of its time. They were also sort of shunted out to the side of the fair. Now, in terms of what they showed inside, these are textiles, some from Crimea, some are from Siberia. But again, like we saw with the Polish pavilion, they took these folk pieces and they boiled them down to their essential geometry. And so that's where you get the Art Deco design. But but again, partly because of the society they hope to create, and also because they were coming out of war and things were more Spartan there, you notice that this is a very different feel. This is the Soviet Workers' Club, where they're all supposed to hang out and talk about the glorious revolution, I guess. But this was, as you can see, it's a much more stripped, less ornamental, more machine, more accessible to everybody. And if you think of what communism aspired to be, it was the idea was that everybody was going to be equal and have the same options and the same access to things. So their pavilion was a departure from the rest of the pavilions there, with the exception of this one. And this one was Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier was part of the Bauhaus movement. And the Bauhaus movement was not crazy about ornamentation at all. Bauhaus thought that Art Deco got it completely wrong, and that the way of the future were machines. Machines can make buildings, machines can make windows, they can make panels, they can make furniture, and that the machine age is what we really should be moving toward, and that was the future. And actually, in the end, Le Corbusier's ideas won, but Le Corbusier's ideas were not what the people who organized this exhibition really had in mind. The tree in the house absolutely would be problematic if it wasn't for the fact that this was a temporary structure. They really wanted to hamstring Le Corbusier. He did not want the trees because, again, he wanted to show a very stark modern reality. And the French were not wild about this pavilion, and they said, you cannot cut any of the trees down, after giving him this difficult little space on the side of the fair where there were trees. When he opened this up, from Bauhaus to your house, exactly, they were right. Yes, I actually love the fact that he had to make the tree part of the dwelling, and I think that maybe he learned a little something from that, that you can't strip nature out completely from everything. But Le Corbusier really, when they saw this building go up, the people organizing the fair were so upset that they built a fence around it so that you couldn't see it. And actually, yes, it makes sense coming out of the arts and crafts movement, because you have arts and crafts that are elemental and stripped down. And then here's this idea that a machine can do these things because we're in the modern era. So the French put a fence around this pavilion. He had to go to court and make them take it down before before things opened up. But this was called the Nouveau Spirit. And if you look at it, this is 1925. Does that not look like a 1960s modern interior? This guy actually, in some ways, really did get it. He did understand that for the majority of people, things made by machines, things made in a uniform manner, things that were more elemental and more stripped down and very straightforward would be the way of the future. And so, yes, they were very fierce. And so if you look at it, this actually is what a lot of people in this generation are collecting, are things that look like this. So Le Corbusier was definitely ahead of his time. Now I have to say I love the Art Deco, and I definitely, personally, I would rather live in a sumptuous place with a lot of Art Deco. But in reality, for a lot of people, myself included, this is actually easier to live with. And then here we have, there's the back end of it, and then here it is reassembled in another location now. So Le Corbusier ended up being phenomenally important and did influence a lot of people with his thoughts at the fair, even though it wasn't what they were looking for. They were looking more for things like this. This is the French embassy office at the fair. And this is more what they had in mind, with, again, lots of rich and sumptuous and this sort of living. So, and it's also, yes, it's what the average person can and could afford. You might not be able to afford to have this room made custom for you, but you could certainly order very clean line furniture that is well made by a machine that's going to last for a long time. Art and sculpture, this is Max Leverrier. This one is Alliot. So you see a little bit again, there's still a little bit of holdover from the Art Nouveau with the sinewy lines and the naturalistic expressions. This is another very famous grill that was done for the fair with the, there's pheasants in the bottom and the nudes in the top. And again, just so ornate and so amazing. But yeah, probably not something a machine could easily make. And it was such a big deal that even the Eiffel Tower went modern. The Eiffel Tower had been built for the 1889 Paris World's Fair and wasn't too far from the site. And so they did these nighttime projections of these crazy lights with all of this Art Deco design on it. I don't really know how they did it, considering that's all like steel beams, but I thought it was pretty cool looking. And there you see the Seine on one side, or the French pavilions on one side, or more of the foreign pavilions. And that thing in the middle of the river is a restaurant. They built floating restaurants in the middle of the river for the exhibition. And it was much more successful than this recent thing with the Olympics where they tried to float the people down river in the middle of a rainstorm. So, so that was the 1925 World's Fair. And I guess, yeah, this is what's interesting. 16 million people went. But again, I think because America wasn't represented there with a pavilion, and it was expensive to travel to Europe. You had to take a steamship and all that. I don't think a lot of Americans went. We felt the influence afterwards, but I think that we don't see a lot from this particular event in the United States. And then, of course, because of World War II, a lot of things that, the exhibits were temporary. A lot of things in the exhibits likely were destroyed. So there isn't a ton of this left for us to experience today, but what is left is a 20-year legacy of Art Deco design, both streamlined design from the United States and North America, and the beautiful things that were made in France and Europe at that time. And now we are entering that period between now and the next 15 years. All of those things will become true antiques, which is pretty interesting because, again, we're also seeing the transition between custom made and machine made items, which means that there will be a lot of machine era items that actually are true antiques in the next 15 or 20 years, which is a pretty good collector horizon for a lot of us. So it's really exciting to me because I think people will start to really look back at these things with a different view of their importance and with a different idea about not just that, oh, they're really cool, but wow, they really were something so very different from what had gone before. And yes, the media did ignore the event in America because it wasn't really what we were about. And then within a few years, all of our design was being really heavily influenced by it. So that changed really quickly. So anyhow, that's what I wanted to share with you because I was thinking, well, it'd be fun to do something that, I know a lot of us are resellers in this group. I really like to do things also for people who are collectors because, not everybody who is interested in this is interested from the standpoint of buying and selling. And so when I thought about, gosh, what was 100 years ago, it dawned on me, oh, this really important event that affected everything that a lot of people collect now and that a lot of us will find to buy and sell, especially as collections are coming back into the marketplace. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any other questions, comments, or thoughts, I am open to chat for however long you wish. I'll also do an outro where I'll hang out in the chat for another 4.5 minutes after we cut off here. But is there? Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It really was fun for me. I learned a whole lot about it that I did not know before. And oh, thank you. Thumbs up are always great. Appreciate that. And just really enjoy sharing what I'm learning with you as we go. So deco jewelry is absolutely hot, so hot right now. I really think anything that oh, good. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. And yeah, I really think anything from this era is definitely going to pick up. With the streamlined design, Dawn, I think that part of the reason is that we're going to see, um, again, things are in transition now. There's just sort of a feeling of an emphasis of going back to basics. Streamlined design is a pretty great basic thing, and it's sort of pre-modern modernism. So I think that we will have a lot of fun as buyers and sellers, and also as collectors. It's made me want to go back and recollect some of the things I let go of that I now regret. So, well, thank you all so much. If anyone else has any questions or anything, let us know. And oh, yes, well, 1970s interior design, interestingly enough, Carol Sue, some of it, some of what I consider the better 70s design, is actually based on the beginning of their throwing back to Art Deco. There was a Deco revival that started in the 70s and really escalated in the 80s, and you do see some elements of 19. I remember in the old Kingdom Stadium in Seattle, a very basic building, institutional, but the paintings in the bathrooms were these sort of long tubes with circles, concentric circles, and that was absolutely a throwback to Art Deco design. And it was just a way to take a big blank wall and make it look more interesting. So I do think that we're going to see some really good 70s design come back. When I think when I think of 70s design, I think of that 70s show. And I think of the Foreman's House, if this makes any sense to you, if any of you watched. They're the ones with the resin grapes and everything is harvest gold and orange and avocado. All those sort of what we see as sort of typical kitsch 70s. But then the neighbor's house, they have a room that is yellow and blue and very sophisticated 1970s design. And when I look at that, I think, oh, if I was doing 70s, that's the room I would want to emulate rather than the kitschy stuff. So we'll see. 70s is not always necessarily frightening. How are the geese and ducks going to fit into that? Well, they're going to come back with the 80s. And I shocked and dismayed myself by buying a set of mixing bowl sets with the Made in USA with the geese on them. They were in wonderful condition. It was $15 for a set of 3. They're really well made. And I thought, well, somebody is going to have nostalgia for these. And I'll be darned, I mentioned it somewhere. And somebody said, oh, my grandmother had those, and I think they're so cute, and I've started collecting them. So it all comes back. And I know Beth in particular really hates it when I say that. So I promise, Beth, I will not make you a gift of anything with blue ribbon geese. I promise, I promise. So let's see here. Okay. Well, with that, I lived in that 70s house. Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, for some people, it's great nostalgia. For some people, it's like been there, done that already. I have to say, for me, the 70s are kind of a been there, done that, um, even though I like aspects of it. And yes, I wish my parents had liked the yellow and blue. My mom did draw the line. She did not go for the harvest gold. She liked the toasted almond refrigerator. So, yes. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And I'm going to stay with you in the chat. So if you have anything else, let us know. Thank you again so much for your support. And we'll do this again next month. Oh, someone had a question about vintage plastics. I'm sorry. Let me try to find that before we go. Where are we here? Expo postcards. Gosh, I'm not seeing it. If whoever had that question wants to ask again, please do, because I'm not finding it here for whatever reason. So, but I'll definitely take the question again. It was from, oh, it was from the last members only. Yeah, that was Miss Oodalali, I think. And I think I tried to answer that to her because she wanted to know lucite versus acrylic versus Bakelite. And basically, the real quick and dirty answer is that Bakelite is technically black, brown, or green, and the other dark green, and the other colors are Catalin because they reformulated it slightly. Everybody still calls it Bakelite, but it is technically a different material. Those are distinguished by very bright colors, very solid colors, being able to be carved because they were a very, very dense, thick, heavy material that was actually invented to replace the old insulators, the glass insulators, because those would break and they wanted something that could deal with 100,000 volts and not crack or fry. And that's how Bakelite came to be. Then it ended up being used for jewelry. After, in the Second World War, we still see the use of Bakelite, but we start seeing clear lucite. Lucite is clear like acrylic is clear, but lucite is heavier and thicker, and acrylic tends to be not quite as clear. It's a different formula. It was cheaper to make and eventually mainly supplanted lucite, but it's not quite as heavy and good quality. Thermoset, I think it's some sort of a vinyl, and thermoset is basically, you see that in a lot of 1960s jewelry. Great for color. It's just basically plastic fantastic. And then, of course, lots of other, there's pop beads made of nylon-based plastic and other things like that. So it just starts to be all over the place. Anyhow, I hope that's some help. Thank you very much. Good night, Lynn. Good night to all of you. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to go ahead and hit the outro now, but I'll stay in the chat with you.